The gunshot echoed across the prairie as Jane Addams clutched her swollen belly, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had been foolish to travel alone, 8 months pregnant and miles from Council Bluffs, but desperation had a way of making even the most sensible people take risks. The year was 1873, and the rolling plains of western Iowa offered no comfort to a woman fleeing her past. Jane flicked the reins, urging her tired mare forward. The wagon creaked beneath her as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm that would make her journey even more treacherous. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Panic surged through her veins as she glanced over her shoulder, seeing dust clouds rising in the distance. Riders, at least 3 of them, gaining ground with every passing moment. "Come on, girl," she whispered to the horse, her voice trembling. "Just a little faster." The baby kicked inside her, as if sensing her fear. Jane had left behind everything she knew in Chicago after her husband's death, hoping to reach her sister in Council Bluffs before her child came into this world. Now, with unknown pursuers at her back and miles of open country ahead, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Rain began to fall, fat droplets splattering against the canvas covering of her wagon. The dirt road quickly turned to mud, making each rotation of the wheels a struggle. The mare whinnied in protest as Jane pushed her harder, the animal's hooves slipping in the increasingly treacherous terrain. The crack of thunder overhead startled the horse, causing her to veer sharply to the right. Jane pulled desperately at the reins, but it was too late. The wagon wheel caught in a deep rut, and with a sickening lurch, the entire vehicle began to tip. "No!" Jane screamed as she felt herself being thrown. Her body slammed against the side of the wagon as it overturned, pain exploding across her shoulder. The world spun in a blur of rain and mud until everything crashed to a halt, leaving her trapped beneath the overturned wagon, pinned from the waist down. The rain fell harder now, soaking through the canvas as Jane struggled to free herself. Her legs were caught beneath crates of her belongings, and the weight of the wagon pressed down on her relentlessly. Worse, a sharp pain radiated through her abdomen. The baby was in distress. "Help!" she cried out, though she knew it was futile. There was no one for miles except the men who had been pursuing her, and she'd rather die than fall into their hands. Jane had recognized them as associates of Martin Blackwell, the man who had threatened to take her unborn child after her husband's gambling debts had gone unpaid. The mare had broken free in the chaos and bolted, disappearing into the rainy landscape. Jane was truly alone now, trapped and vulnerable as labor pains began to intensify. She tried again to shift the weight pinning her down, but succeeded only in sending fresh waves of agony through her body. "Please," she whispered, unsure if she was addressing God or simply the uncaring sky above. "Please help us." As if in answer to her prayer, the sound of hoofbeats approached through the rain. Jane held her breath, praying it wasn't Blackwell's men. Her heart sank as a tall figure on horseback emerged from the mist, silhouetted against the stormy sky. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "Anybody there?" Jane remained silent, weighing her options. The man dismounted, approaching the overturned wagon cautiously. "I saw the accident from the ridge," the stranger said, crouching down to peer beneath the wagon. When his eyes met Jane's, they widened in shock. "Good Lord, madam, are you hurt?" His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but Jane could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that seemed kind, though wary. He wasn't one of Blackwell's men, she was certain of that much. "I'm trapped," Jane managed, another contraction stealing her breath. "And the baby's coming." The stranger's expression shifted from concern to determination. "My name's Daniel Jackson," he he said, quickly assessing the situation. "I'm going to get you out of there." Daniel moved with purpose, examining how the wagon had fallen. "Don't worry, madam. I've seen worse predicaments." "Jane," she gasped through clenched teeth. "Jane Adams." "Miss Adams, I need you to stay calm," Daniel instructed, removing his coat despite the pouring rain. "This wagon's heavy, but I think I can lift it enough for you to slide out." Jane watched as he positioned himself at the edge of the wagon, planting his boots firmly in the mud. Daniel was tall and broad-shouldered, with the muscular build of a man who worked with his hands, but even so, what he proposed seemed impossible. "Ready?" he asked, bending his knees and gripping the wooden frame. "When I lift, you push with your arms and try to slide yourself free." Before Jane could protest, Daniel tensed, his face contorting with effort as he began to lift. The muscles in his arms bulged against the fabric of his shirt as he strained against the enormous weight. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, impossibly, the wagon began to rise. "Now," Daniel commanded through gritted teeth, his entire body trembling with exertion. Jane didn't hesitate. Summoning every ounce of strength she possessed, she pushed with her arms, dragging herself inch by painful inch toward freedom. The wagon creaked ominously above her as Daniel held it aloft by sheer willpower. With a final desperate effort, Jane pulled herself clear just as Daniel's strength gave out. The wagon crashed back to the ground as he collapsed to his knees beside her, chest heaving. "Are you all right?" he gasped, rainwater streaming down his face. Jane had no chance to answer as another contraction seized her, more powerful than any before. "The baby," she moaned, clutching her belly. "It's coming now." Daniel's expression flashed with panic before settling into resolute determination. "My cabin's not far," he said, gathering Jane into his arms with surprising gentleness. "Can you hold on for a little longer?" Jane nodded weakly, allowing him to lift her onto his horse. Daniel mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his free hand. "What about your things?" he asked, nodding toward the overturned wagon. "Leave them," Jane whispered, leaning back against his solid chest as another pain tore through her. "Just go." They rode through the storm, Jane drifting in and out of consciousness as contractions came with increasing frequency. Daniel's voice remained steady in her ear, encouraging her to hold on, promising that they were almost there. Despite her agony, Jane found comfort in the strength of the arms that held her secure. Finally, through the curtain of rain, a small cabin appeared on the horizon. It was modest but sturdy looking, with smoke curling from the chimney. "We made it," Daniel murmured, relief evident in his voice as he guided his horse to the hitching post. Before Jane could respond, the sound of approaching riders made them both freeze. 3 men emerged from the rain, their faces hard and unwelcoming as they reined in their horses. "Well, what do we have here?" the leader drawled, his eyes moving from Daniel to Jane. "Looks like we found what we've been searching for." Jane recognized him immediately. Curtis Webb, Blackwell's most trusted enforcer. Terror clawed at her throat as she pressed back against Daniel's chest. "This woman needs medical attention," Daniel said evenly, his arm tightening protectively around Jane. "Whatever business you have with her can wait." Webb's thin lips curved into a cruel smile. "I'm afraid not, Cowboy. Step aside. The lady's coming with us." "She's in labor," Daniel replied, his voice hardening. "She's not going anywhere." Webb exchanged glances with his companions before reaching for the gun at his hip. "I won't ask again." With surprising speed, Daniel drew his own weapon, the barrel aimed squarely at Webb's chest. "Neither will I." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Rain continued to fall around them as Jane held her breath, another contraction building. Finally, Webb lowered his hand, though his eyes remained cold. "This isn't over," he warned. "Mr. Blackwell wants what's his. We'll be back." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his companions following suit as they disappeared back into the storm. "Who were they?" Daniel asked as he carefully helped Jane down from the horse. "Trouble," she managed, gasping as pain radiated through her. "I'll explain later." Daniel didn't press further, focusing instead on getting her inside the cabin. It was simple but clean, with a fire burning in the hearth and a narrow bed against one wall. He guided Jane to it, helping her lie down as another contraction seized her. "I don't know much about birthing babies," he admitted, his expression uncertain, "but my mother was a midwife. I helped her once or twice." Jane clutched his hand, surprising herself with the gesture. "I don't have much choice in the matter, Mr. Jackson." A faint smile touched his lips. "Daniel," he corrected, "and I suppose you're right about that." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Daniel proved more capable than he'd let on, his hands steady and his voice calm as he coached Jane through each contraction. He heated water, tore strips from a clean shirt for swaddling, and never once left her side as she fought to bring her child into the world. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, a different kind of force was at work. Jane pushed when Daniel told her to push, rested when he told her to rest, and drew strength from the unwavering confidence in his deep blue eyes. "You're doing fine," he assured her, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "Just one more big push." Jane gathered the last of her strength, bearing down with everything she had left. With a final, agonizing effort, her baby slipped into Daniel's waiting hands. "It's a boy," he announced, his voice thick with emotion as the infant's cries filled the cabin. "A healthy baby boy." Tears streamed down Jane's face as Daniel placed the swaddled newborn in her arms. Despite the circumstances, despite the danger that still lurked beyond the cabin walls, this moment was perfect. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at the man who had saved both her life and her child's. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Daniel shook his head, a soft smile playing at his lips. "No need for that, Miss Adams. Anyone would have done the same." But as Jane gazed into his kind eyes, she knew that wasn't true. What Daniel Jackson had done today was extraordinary, and she had a feeling this was just the beginning of their story. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world bathed in golden morning light. Jane awoke to find Daniel sitting in a chair beside the bed, his chin resting on his chest as he slept. Her son lay in a makeshift cradle nearby, fashioned from a drawer padded with blankets. For a moment, Jane simply watched them both, her heart full of a gratitude she couldn't express. Then her baby stirred, his tiny face scrunching as he prepared to cry. Before the sound could escape, Daniel was awake, moving to lift the infant with hands that dwarfed the small bundle. "Good morning," he said, noticing Jane's open eyes as he gently rocked her son. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," she admitted, "but alive thanks to you." Daniel carefully transferred the baby to her waiting arms. "He's a strong one, takes after his mother, I'd wager." Jane smiled down at her son, tracing his perfect features with a gentle finger. "I'm going to call him Thomas, after my father." "Thomas Adams," Daniel nodded. "It's a good name." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the baby's soft sounds. Finally, Jane spoke the words that had been weighing on her mind since the previous day. "Those men will come back," she said quietly. "They work for a man named Martin Blackwell. My late husband owed him money, a lot of money. When Henry died, Blackwell came to collect, when he realized I was pregnant." She shuddered at the memory. "He said the child would be payment enough. That he and his wife had been trying for years without success." Daniel's expression darkened. He wanted to take your baby, Jane nodded, holding Thomas closer. I fled Chicago as soon as I was able, hoping to reach my sister in Council Bluffs before the birth. I almost made it. Daniel stood, moving to check the fire. His silence made Jane nervous, wondering if he regretted getting involved in her troubles. I should go, she said, though the thought of facing the world alone with her newborn filled her with dread. We've imposed on you enough. You're not going anywhere, Daniel replied firmly, turning to face her. Not until you've healed, at least, and certainly not with Blackwell's men searching for you. Relief washed over Jane, though she tried not to show it. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. A hint of a smile played at Daniel's lips. Trouble has a way of finding me regardless, Miss Adams. At least this time, it's for a worthy cause. Over the next few days, a routine developed between them. Daniel cared for his animals, repaired the cabin's roof that had leaked during the storm, and made trips to his nearest neighbor, an elderly widow named Mrs. Peterson, who lived 3 miles away to borrow items for the baby. Jane focused on regaining her strength and caring for Thomas, who proved to be a remarkably content infant. During the long evenings, they talked. Jane learned that Daniel had come west after the war, seeking solitude after witnessing too much death as a cavalry soldier. He'd built the cabin with his own hands 3 years ago, supporting himself by breaking horses for nearby ranches and occasionally guiding hunting parties from the east. Don't you get lonely out here? Jane asked one night as they sat before the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his makeshift cradle. Daniel considered the question, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Sometimes, he admitted, but I've found that most people bring more complications than comfort. And us. Jane couldn't help asking, are we complications or comfort? His eyes met hers, warm in the firelight. A bit of both, I suppose, but the good kind of complication. The simple admission made Jane's heart flutter in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. It had been only months since Henry's death, and while theirs had been a marriage more of convenience than passion, she had mourned him sincerely. The idea of feeling anything for another man so soon seemed disloyal somehow. And yet, watching Daniel as he gently rocked Thomas to sleep or prepared meals with quiet efficiency, Jane couldn't deny the growing warmth she felt in his presence. There was a steadiness to him that Henry had lacked, a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time in years. On the 5th day after Thomas's birth, Daniel returned from checking his traps with a grim expression. "Someone's been through your wagon," he announced, setting his rifle by the door. "They've taken some things, left others scattered about. Didn't look like simple thieves to me." Jane's blood ran cold. Blackwell's men. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. Most likely, they're searching the area. It's only a matter of time before they find this place. "What should we do?" Jane asked, clutching Thomas to her chest. Daniel considered for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "We need to get you to Council Bluffs as planned. Your sister can help protect you there, and it'll be harder for Blackwell to operate in a larger settlement." "But how? I can't travel far with Thomas so young and they're watching the roads." "We'll go tomorrow," Daniel decided, "before dawn. I know trails that don't appear on any map, old Indian paths that few white men have traveled. We can reach Council Bluffs in 2 days if we push hard." Jane searched his face, seeing the determination there. "You do that for us. Leave your home to help strangers." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, an emotion Jane couldn't quite name. "You're not strangers anymore, Jane. Not to me." The simple statement hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Jane looked down at Thomas, sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, unaware of the dangers that threatened his young life. "Thank you," she whispered, words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. "For everything." Daniel merely nodded, turning away to begin preparations for their journey. Jane watched him work, efficient and focused, and silently promised herself that someday, somehow, she would find a way to repay his kindness. They set out before first light, Daniel leading his horse with Jane and Thomas riding, wrapped in extra blankets against the pre-dawn chill. They left the cabin looking as though they intended to return fire-banked, dishes washed, bed made in hopes of buying time if Blackwell's men came calling. The trail Daniel chose was barely visible, winding through dense woods before emerging onto rolling grasslands that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. He walked alongside the horse, occasionally offering a steadying hand when the terrain grew rough. "My father showed me these paths," he explained as they paused to rest near a small stream. "He traded with the Omaha people when I was a boy, said a man should always know more than one way to get where he's going." Jane smiled, adjusting Thomas against her chest. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Daniel agreed, a touch of sadness in his voice. "Lost him to influenza when I was 16. My mother followed a year later." "I'm sorry," Jane said softly. "It's hard to be alone in the world." Daniel helped her down from the horse so she could stretch her legs. "Is that why you married? To avoid being alone?" The question was direct but not unkind. Jane considered her answer carefully as she dipped her handkerchief in the stream to wipe Thomas's face. "Partly," she admitted. "My parents died when I was young. My sister and I were raised by an aunt who made it clear we were burdens. When Henry proposed, I saw a chance for a home of my own." She sighed, remembering her naive hopes. "I didn't know about his gambling then, or his drinking. Was he cruel to you?" Daniel asked, his voice carefully neutral. Jane shook her head. "No, not cruel, just absent. Even when he was there, his mind was elsewhere. When he died thrown from a horse while intoxicated, I mourned the man I had hoped he would become more than the man he was." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And the baby?" "A surprise," Jane said, smiling down at Thomas. "Henry had been gone for 2 weeks on business when he returned home ill. He died 3 days later, never knowing I was with child." They continued their journey in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. By midday, they had covered considerable ground, though Jane could tell that Daniel was deliberately keeping a slower pace for her comfort. Thomas remained remarkably content, sleeping through most of the journey and waking only to nurse. As the sun began its descent, Daniel led them to a sheltered hollow where a small stream gurgled over smooth stones. "We'll camp here for the night," he decided, helping Jane dismount. "There's good water, and the trees will hide our fire." He efficiently set up a small camp, building a fire that produced little smoke and fashioning a comfortable bed of blankets for Jane and the baby. As darkness fell, they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, supplemented with wild berries Daniel had gathered along the way. "Tomorrow we'll reach the main road to Council Bluffs," he explained as they sat beside the fire. "We'll have to be cautious, it's well-traveled, and Blackwell's men could be watching it." Jane nodded, trying to ignore the flicker of disappointment at the thought that their journey was nearly over. "What will you do after? Return to your cabin?" Daniel poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "It might not be safe there for a while if Blackwell's men connect me to your disappearance." "I've brought nothing but trouble to your life," Jane said, guilt washing over her. "Not true," Daniel replied, his eyes reflecting the firelight as they met hers. "You've brought perspective." "Perspective," he smiled slightly. "I've been alone a long time, Jane, convinced myself that's how I wanted it. Then you and Thomas appeared and suddenly my cabin feels different. Empty somehow." Jane's heart quickened at his words. "Daniel." You should rest, he said abruptly, standing. I'll take first watch. We have a long day ahead tomorrow. Jane wanted to say more, to explore the feelings his words had stirred, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. She settled on her makeshift bed with Thomas nestled beside her, watching as Daniel positioned himself at the edge of their camp, rifle across his knees. "Good night," she murmured, feeling safe despite their precarious situation. "Sleep well, Jane," Daniel replied softly. "I'll keep you safe." She believed him completely. Dawn broke clear and cold, with dew sparkling on the prairie grass like scattered diamonds. Jane awoke to find Daniel already preparing for their departure, his movements efficient as he saddled the horse and extinguished all evidence of their fire. "Any sign of trouble?" she asked, nursing Thomas before they set out. Daniel shook his head. "All quiet. But stay alert once we reach the main road. We'll be exposed there." They traveled swiftly through the morning, the landscape gradually changing as they approached more settled areas. Occasional farmhouses dotted the horizon, and the trail widened into a proper road. By midday, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance, the outskirts of Council Bluffs. "We've made good time," Daniel observed, scanning the road ahead. "Your sister's home, do you know exactly where it is?" "Yes," she wrote detailed directions. "She and her husband live on the north side of town, near the river. Joseph is a blacksmith. His shop should be easy to find." Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good, you'll be safe there." They were less than 5 miles from town, when the sound of approaching horses made them both tense. Daniel quickly led them off the road, concealing Jane and Thomas behind a thick stand of bushes, while he positioned himself protectively before them. 3 riders appeared around the bend, and Jane's heart sank as she recognized Curtis Webb among them. They slowed as they approached, Webb's cold eyes scanning the surroundings with predatory focus. "Stay hidden," Daniel whispered, stepping forward to intercept the riders. "No matter what happens, get Thomas to town if you can." Before Jane could protest, he had moved onto the road, affecting a casual stance as the riders approached. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he called, one hand resting near his holstered pistol. "Fine day for traveling." Webb reined in his horse, studying Daniel with narrowed eyes. "Indeed it is. We're looking for a woman pregnant, traveling alone. Might have had her baby by now. Seen anyone matching that description?" Daniel shook his head. "Can't say that I have. Not many women foolish enough to travel these parts alone." Webb's gaze sharpened. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "Don't think so," Daniel replied evenly. "I keep to myself mostly." One of Webb's companions leaned forward in his saddle. "That's him, Curtis, the one from the cabin." "I'm sure of it." Webb's hand moved to his gun. "Where is she?" "Don't know what you're talking about," Daniel said, his stance shifting subtly. "The Adams woman," Webb snapped. "We know you took her in. Where is she now?" Daniel's expression remained impassive. "Riding for Council Bluffs, I expect. Left my place 3 days ago." Webb exchanged glances with his companions. "Search the area," he ordered. "She can't have gotten far with a newborn." As the other men began to dismount, Daniel drew his pistol with lightning speed. "I wouldn't," he warned, the barrel aimed steadily at Webb's chest. Webb laughed, though his eyes remained cold. 3 against 1, Cowboy. Bad odds." "Maybe," Daniel conceded, "but you'll be the first to die." The tension stretched between them, neither man willing to back down. Jane watched from her hiding place, heart in her throat. Thomas clutched tightly to her chest. Finally, Webb raised a hand, signaling his men to halt. "This isn't worth dying over," he said. "Blackwell can find another solution to his problem." Daniel's aim never wavered. "Tell Blackwell the woman and her child are under my protection. If he wants them, he'll have to come through me." Something like respect flickered in Webb's eyes. "I'll deliver your message," he he said, slowly backing his horse away. But Blackwell isn't a man who takes no for an answer. This isn't over. It is for today, Daniel replied firmly. Webb nodded curtly, then turned his horse, his men following suit. They galloped back the way they had come, dust rising in their wake. Daniel waited until they were well out of sight before holstering his weapon and returning to Jane's hiding place. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Jane nodded, though she couldn't stop trembling. "You could have been killed." "Wouldn't be the first time I've faced long odds," Daniel replied with a grim smile. "But we need to move quickly now. They'll likely circle back once they're sure we've let our guard down." They continued toward Council Bluffs with renewed urgency, Daniel insisting that Jane and Thomas ride while he walked alongside. As they approached the outskirts of town, the road became busier with wagons and riders, offering them a measure of anonymity among the traffic. Council Bluffs revealed itself as a thriving frontier settlement, with wooden buildings lining the main street and the constant bustle of commerce filling the air. Jane directed Daniel toward the north side of town, where they soon found the blacksmith shop with Peterson Metalworks painted on a wooden sign above the door. A burly man with a thick beard looked up from his anvil as they approached, his expression changing from curiosity to shock as he recognized Jane. "Joseph," she called, relief flooding through her. "It's Jane, good Lord," the blacksmith exclaimed, setting down his hammer. "Julia." He bellowed toward the attached house. "Come quick, it's your sister." A slender woman with hair the same chestnut shade as Jane's burst from the house, her eyes widening at the sight of her sister. "Jane! Oh, Jane, we've been so worried." The sisters embraced tearfully, Jane carefully balancing Thomas between them. Julia gasped when she noticed the baby, her face lighting with joy. "Is this?" "Oh, Jane, he's beautiful. When did this happen? And who is?" She looked questioningly toward Daniel, who had remained a respectful distance away. "This is Daniel Jackson," Jane explained, gesturing him forward. "He saved our lives, both of them, actually." Daniel removed his hat, nodding politely. "Madam, sir, just glad I could help." Joseph stepped forward, extending a massive hand. "Any man who helps my family is welcome here. Come inside, both of you. You look exhausted." They were ushered into the cozy home attached to the blacksmith shop, where Julia immediately began fussing over Thomas while Joseph prepared coffee. Daniel seemed uncomfortable with the attention, perching on the edge of his chair as though ready to flee at any moment. Once they were settled, Jane explained everything: Henry's death, Blackwell's threats, her flight from Chicago, the overturned wagon, and Daniel's timely rescue. She glossed over certain details, like the moment Daniel had lifted the wagon with seemingly impossible strength, feeling that some things were too personal to share, even with family. "This Blackwell sounds dangerous," Joseph said gravely when she had finished. "But he'd be a fool to cause trouble in town. We have a proper sheriff here and people look out for each other." "His men are persistent," Daniel warned. "They were watching the road into town. They might have seen where we went." Joseph's expression hardened. "Let them come." "I served in the war too, Mr. Jackson. I know how to defend my family." Julia, ever practical, turned to Daniel. "You must stay with us, at least for a few days. It's not safe for you to travel back alone if these men are watching." Daniel looked uncomfortable with the invitation. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Julia insisted. "We have a spare room. It's the least we can do after what you've done for Jane and the baby." Jane found herself holding her breath as Daniel considered the offer. Part of her feared he would refuse, would walk out of her life as suddenly as he had entered it. The thought sent an unexpected pang through her heart. "Thank you," he finally said, much to Jane's relief. "Just until I'm sure no one's watching the roads." That evening, after a hearty meal and lengthy conversation, Jane found herself alone with Daniel on the small porch behind the house. Julia had insisted on taking Thomas for a while, claiming her right as an aunt to spoil the boy from his first day in her home. "Your family is kind," Daniel observed, leaning against the porch railing. "You'll be safe here." Jane nodded, watching his profile in the fading light. "What will you do now?" Daniel sighed, his gaze on the distant horizon. "Head back to my cabin, I suppose, check the damage." "And if Blackwell's men are waiting?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've faced worse." Silence settled between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken emotions. Jane struggled to find the words to express her gratitude, her admiration, and the confusing feelings that had grown during their brief time together. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "I don't know how to thank you properly for what you've done." He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the gathering dusk. "You don't need to thank me, Jane. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't have. What you did lifting that wagon alone, delivering Thomas, protecting us from Blackwell's men, it was extraordinary." Daniel looked away, seemingly embarrassed by her praise. "I just did what needed doing." Jane stepped closer, her heart racing. "When I was trapped under that wagon, I thought Thomas and I were going to die there. Then you appeared like some kind of miracle." She touched his arm gently. "You saved us, Daniel. I'll never forget that." His eyes met hers, intense and searching. "I'm glad I was there," he said softly, "meeting you and Thomas. It changed something in me, Jane." The admission hung between them, fraught with possibility. Jane found herself leaning closer, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. Daniel hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face before he slowly bent his head toward hers. The door opened suddenly, causing them both to step apart as Julia appeared with a fussing Thomas in her arms. "I think he's hungry," she announced, either oblivious to or politely ignoring the moment she had interrupted, and getting quite vocal about it. Jane took her son with a mixture of gratitude and regret, the moment with Daniel broken. "Thank you for watching him, Julia." As she settled into a chair to nurse Thomas, Jane was acutely aware of Daniel excusing himself to help Joseph with some chore in the workshop. The connection that had flared between them remained unacknowledged, yet Jane could feel it humming in the air like distant thunder. That night, lying in her sister's guest room with Thomas sleeping beside her, Jane found herself unable to sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to Daniel, the strength of his arms as he'd lifted the wagon, the gentleness of his hands as he delivered her son, the intensity in his eyes on the porch. She had known him less than 2 weeks, yet he had become essential to her in a way she couldn't fully comprehend. Morning brought news that set the household on edge. Joseph returned from an early errand in town with a troubled expression. "3 strangers checked into the hotel last night," he reported as they sat around the breakfast table, "asking questions about a woman with a newborn, offering money for information." Daniel's expression darkened. "Webb and his men, they're persistent, I'll give them that." "The sheriff's been notified," Joseph assured them, "but it might be best if Jane and the baby stay out of sight for a few days." Julia nodded in agreement. "No one in town knows you're here yet, Jane. We can keep it that way until these men give up and leave." Daniel stood, his decision apparently made. "I should go, draw them away from here." "No," Jane protested more forcefully than she'd intended. "They'll follow you, hurt you." "Better me than you and Thomas," Daniel replied grimly. Joseph shook his head. "No one's going anywhere just yet. Let's see what the sheriff can do first. These men can't simply kidnap a woman and child in broad daylight in the middle of town." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed to stay, though Jane could see the restlessness in him as the day progressed. He paced the small house like a caged animal, constantly checking the windows and doors. By evening, the tension had become unbearable. "I need some air," Daniel announced after dinner. "Just a short walk." "It's not safe," Jane argued, following him to the door. "Please, Daniel." He turned to face her, his expression softening at the concern in her eyes. "I won't go far. I just need to clear my head." Before Jane could protest further, he had slipped out the door into the gathering darkness. She stood watching until his figure disappeared around the corner, a sense of foreboding settling in her chest. Her fears proved justified when an hour passed with no sign of his return. Then 2 hours. "Something's wrong," Jane insisted as Joseph prepared to go looking for him. "Blackwell's men must have found him." "Stay here with Julia and the baby," Joseph instructed, checking his revolver before tucking it into his belt. "I'll find him." But before Joseph could leave, a commotion outside drew their attention. Jane rushed to the window to see Daniel staggering up the path to the house, his face bloodied and his clothing torn. Julia gasped in shock as Joseph flung open the door to help Daniel inside. "What happened?" Daniel collapsed into a chair, grimacing in pain. "Webb and his men caught me by the livery stable, wanted to know where Jane and the baby were hiding." Jane knelt beside him, heart pounding with fear and guilt. "You're hurt because of us." Daniel managed a pained smile. "Worth it. Didn't tell them anything." Joseph examined Daniel's injuries with a practiced eye. "Doesn't look like anything's broken, but you'll be sore for days. Julia, get the whiskey and some clean cloths." As Julia hurried to gather supplies, Daniel caught Jane's hand. "They're leaving town," he murmured. "Overheard them talking. Blackwell's called them back to Chicago. Something about a new plan." Relief washed over Jane, tempered immediately by concern for Daniel's condition. "Let me help clean these cuts," she insisted, taking the supplies Julia brought. With gentle hands, Jane cleaned the blood from Daniel's face, wincing at each grimace of pain that crossed his features. Despite his injuries, she couldn't help noticing the strength in his jaw, the warmth in his eyes as they followed her movements. "You should have seen the other guys," he joked weakly as she bandaged a particularly nasty cut on his forehead. Jane smiled despite herself. "I'm sure you gave as good as you got." "Better," Daniel confirmed with a hint of pride. "Webb won't be sitting comfortably for a week." Julia insisted that Daniel take her bed that night, while she would share with Jane and Thomas. Despite his protests, Daniel was clearly exhausted and in too much pain to argue effectively. Jane helped him to the room, supporting his weight as he limped down the short hallway. "Thank you," he murmured as she helped him sit on the edge of the bed. "For everything." Jane shook her head, emotion welling in her throat. "Don't thank me. This is all my fault." Daniel caught her hand as she turned to leave. "No, Jane, don't think that way. I chose to help you." "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Their eyes met, and the connection that had been building between them seemed to crystallize in that moment. Without thinking, Jane leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his, a whisper of a kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't put into words. When she pulled back, Daniel was watching her with wonder in his eyes. "Jane, rest," she whispered, touching his cheek softly. "We'll talk tomorrow." That night, as Jane lay with Thomas sleeping peacefully beside her, she allowed herself to imagine a future she hadn't dared consider before, one with Daniel in it. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had come to Council Bluffs seeking safety, not love. Yet somehow, in the midst of danger and uncertainty, her heart had found its way to this quiet, strong man who had risked everything to protect her and her son. Morning brought news that confirmed Webb and his companions had indeed left town, presumably heading back to Chicago as Daniel had overheard. The relief in the household was palpable. though Joseph insisted on maintaining caution for a few more days. Daniel recovered quickly, his resilience impressive to everyone. By the third day, he was helping Joseph in the blacksmith shop, his skill with metal work revealing yet another facet of his capabilities. Jane watched from the doorway as he shaped a horseshoe with practiced movements, the muscles in his arms flexing with each strike of the hammer. "He's a good man," Julia observed, coming to stand beside her sister. "The way he looks at you. It reminds me of how Joseph looked at me when we first met." Jane felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's too soon. Henry's only been gone a few months." Julia squeezed her hand gently. "Life is short on the frontier, Jane, too short to deny yourself happiness when it presents itself." "What if he doesn't want to stay?" Jane voiced her deepest fear. "He's used to solitude. A woman and child would change everything for him." "Some changes are worth making," Julia replied wisely, "but you won't know unless you ask him." The opportunity came that evening when Daniel suggested a walk to thank the sheriff for his assistance in monitoring Blackwell's men. Jane left Thomas in Julia's capable hands and joined Daniel in the cool evening air, conscious of the curious glances from townspeople as they passed. "Everyone's staring," Jane observed, uncomfortable with the attention. Daniel smiled, offering his arm in a gallant gesture. "They're staring at you, not me. Can't blame them. You're the prettiest thing to come to Council Bluffs in a long while." Jane laughed, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. "Now you're teasing me." "Not at all," he replied, his expression suddenly serious. "You're beautiful, Jane, inside and out." The simple compliment warmed her more than any elaborate flattery could have. They continued walking in comfortable silence, eventually finding themselves at the edge of town near the Missouri River. The setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson, a spectacular display that momentarily stole Jane's breath. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as they watched the sunset, "about what happens next." Jane's heart quickened. "And what have you decided?" He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the golden light. "That depends on you in part." "On me?" Jane asked, hope and uncertainty warring within her. Daniel nodded, taking her hands in his. "I came west seeking solitude, convinced that was what I needed after the war. For 3 years I've lived alone, speaking to hardly anyone except when necessity demanded it." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Then a wagon overturned on a rainy afternoon, and suddenly everything changed. "You and Thomas. You reminded me what it's like to care about someone, to have a purpose beyond mere survival." Jane held her breath as he continued, his hands warm around hers. "I know it's sudden," Daniel said softly. "I know you're still grieving Henry, still adjusting to motherhood, but I can't leave without telling you what's in my heart." "Tell me," Jane whispered, her voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of the river. "I love you, Jane Addams," Daniel declared simply. "I think I started falling in love the moment I saw you trapped under that wagon, fighting so fiercely for your child's life. Your courage, your kindness, your strength, they've awakened something in me I thought was dead." Tears welled in Jane's eyes at his honest declaration. "Daniel, I'm not asking for promises," he hastened to add. "Just a chance. I could build us a home here in Council Bluffs or wherever you want to settle. I'd be a father to Thomas, teach him everything my father taught me. We could make a good life together, Jane, if you're willing to try." Jane looked into his earnest face, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and knew with sudden clarity what her answer must be. "I love you too," she admitted, the words bringing with them a profound sense of rightness. "It happened so quickly, I hardly recognized it myself. But when I thought Blackwell's men had hurt you, when I imagined a future without you in it, I couldn't bear it." The joy that transformed Daniel's face was worth any uncertainty, any fear of moving forward too quickly. He gathered her gently in his arms, mindful of her still healing body, and kissed her with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked when they finally parted. "I don't want you to feel pressured because of what happened with Blackwell or because I helped with Thomas." Jane shook her head, smiling through her tears. "I'm sure. What I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude, Daniel. It's deeper than that. Truer." They stood together as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, planning a future neither had anticipated just 2 weeks earlier. Daniel would stay in Council Bluffs, working with Joseph in the blacksmith shop while building a small house for them on land at the edge of town. They would marry in the spring, giving Jane appropriate time to mourn Henry while allowing Daniel to establish himself in the community. And Thomas would grow up surrounded by love, not just from his mother and the man who would become his father in every way that mattered, but from his aunt and uncle and the tight-knit community of Council Bluffs. "There's just one thing that worries me," Jane admitted as they walked back toward Joseph and Julia's home. "Blackwell," Daniel guessed, his expression darkening. Jane nodded. "He doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily. What if he comes back?" Daniel's arm tightened protectively around her shoulders. "Then we'll face him together. But I don't think he will. Men like Blackwell prey on those they perceive as weak and isolated. You're neither of those things anymore, Jane. You have family here, a community that will stand with you." His confidence reassured her, though she knew the fear would linger for some time. Still, Jane refused to let Blackwell's shadow darken the joy she had found with Daniel. Some risks were worth taking, and loving this man was the easiest decision she had ever made. The months that followed proved Daniel right about many things. Blackwell never returned to Council Bluffs, apparently deciding that one woman and child weren't worth the trouble. Daniel's skill as a blacksmith quickly earned him respect in the community, while his quiet strength and unfailing kindness won him friends among the townspeople. Jane watched with pride as he built their home with his own hands, a modest but sturdy house with a view of both the river and the rolling prairie beyond. She contributed where she could, sewing curtains and planning the small garden they would plant in the spring, all while caring for Thomas, who grew stronger and more curious each day. When spring arrived, painting the prairie with wildflowers, Jane stood before the town's small church in a simple blue dress, Thomas in Julia's arms, and promised to love Daniel Jackson for all the days of her life. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the ring on her finger, a delicate band he had crafted himself in Joseph's forge. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after the war," he confessed that night as they stood on the porch of their new home, Thomas sleeping peacefully inside. "You gave me back my heart, Jane. You and Thomas." Jane leaned against his solid warmth, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in less than a year. From the terror of Blackwell's threats to the despair of being trapped beneath the overturned wagon, to this moment of perfect contentment, it seemed almost like a dream. "You ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" she asked, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "If my wagon hadn't overturned on that exact stretch of road." Daniel smiled, pulling her closer. "I prefer to think it was meant to be, that somehow, across all the miles and years, we were always heading toward each other." Jane liked that idea that fate or providence or simple blind luck had brought them together against impossible odds. That some things, no matter how unlikely, were simply meant to be. As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter, Emily, joined them 2 years after their marriage, followed by twin boys, Samuel and Benjamin, 3 years later. Thomas grew into a strong, thoughtful young man who inherited Daniel's quiet confidence and Jane's compassion. He never questioned that Daniel was his father in every way that mattered, though they told him the truth about his birth when he was old enough to understand. Daniel's business prospered as Council Bluffs grew from a frontier settlement into a thriving gateway to the West. Jane established a small school in their home before the town built a proper schoolhouse and hired her as its first teacher. Together, they built a life filled with love, hard work, and deep satisfaction. Sometimes, on summer evenings when the children were asleep and the prairie stretched golden in the setting sun, Jane would remind Daniel of that rainy afternoon when fate had brought them together. "You remember how you lifted that wagon?" she would ask, still amazed by the memory. "I thought I was hallucinating. No man should have been able to do that alone." Daniel would smile and pull her close. "Fear and love make people capable of extraordinary things, Jane. In that moment, I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, even though we just met." "My hero," she would tease, though they both knew the words held profound truth. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Daniel surprised Jane with a special gift, a small, exquisitely crafted silver pendant in the shape of a wagon wheel. "To remind us where our journey together began," he explained as he fastened it around her neck, under the most unlikely of circumstances. Jane touched the pendant, tears welling in her eyes. "I was so afraid that day," she remembered, "for Thomas, for myself. Then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even formed yet." Daniel kissed her gently. "And you gave me something I never knew I needed: a family, a purpose, a home that exists in people rather than places." As they stood together watching their children play in the yard of the home they had built, Jane thought about all the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. The wagon that had overturned, trapping her beneath it. The extraordinary strength Daniel had found to lift it alone. The courage they had both summoned to begin again, to trust in the possibility of love after loss. "No regrets?" Daniel asked, seeming to read her thoughts as he often did. Jane smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Not a single one." And in that perfect moment, with the man who had once saved her life now saving her heart each day with his unwavering love, Jane knew it was true. Every step of their unlikely journey had led exactly where they were meant to be together.